Imagine waking up every morning next to the person you have loved for nearly 4 decades, only to discover that while you were building a family, a home, and a legacy together, she was secretly plotting with your own son-in-law to destroy it all. That's what happened to me, and trust me, I didn't just sit back and take it. I made sure justice was served. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most, you know how deep that knife cuts. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stick with me because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about revenge, justice, and reclaiming dignity after the ultimate betrayal. For 37 years, my life had been a carefully built house of cards, strong enough to weather storms, yet delicate, dependent on trust and balance. And up until that night, I believed every card was exactly where it belonged. It was supposed to be a normal evening, the kind of evening I had grown to cherish as I got older. Our home was quiet, humming with the soft buzz of the chandelier above the dining table. The smell of roast beef drifted through the air, a recipe Martha had perfected over decades. The crystal glasses were set out, catching the light in the way they always had since the day her mother gave them to us as a wedding gift. Little rituals, little habits. They felt timeless. But even perfect evenings can unravel with something as small as a missing charger. I remember it vividly. My phone had died just as I was preparing for one of the most important calls of my career. Johnson, the investor from Madison Avenue, was supposed to call at exactly 8:00 p.m. He was the key to closing a multi-million-dollar property deal I'd been chasing for months. Without it, years of planning could collapse. I was tearing through the living room like a man possessed, ripping cushions from the couch, opening drawers, muttering curses under my breath. The charger cord lay somewhere in the house, but I couldn't find it. To me, in that moment, it was like a lifeline that had vanished. My pulse thudded in my ears. Every second that ticked by was a second closer to losing everything I had worked for. "What's wrong?" Her voice drifted from the kitchen doorway, calm and warm. Martha stood there with a dish towel in hand, framed by the soft glow of the overhead light. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect picture of a devoted wife, concern etched into her features, love in her tone. "My phone's dead," I snapped, still digging through the couch. "Johnson's calling at 8 sharp about the Madison Avenue property. I can't find the damn charger anywhere." Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her solution ready as always. "Use mine, honey. Passwords, your birthday." Just like that, the panic subsided. Relief washed over me in a warm wave, and I felt a twinge of guilt for my sharp tone. After 37 years, she still knew how to calm the storm, still knew how to save the day. I took the phone from her hands. It was warm in my palm, carrying the faint scent of her perfume, familiar, comforting. "You're a lifesaver," I said. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and smiled the same smile I had fallen in love with all those years ago in college. "I'll finish dinner while you handle business," she said, vanishing back into the kitchen. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. In that moment, my heart swelled with gratitude. 37 years, and she was still my partner, my anchor. That's what I thought. That's what I wanted to think. I unlocked her phone with Face ID. The smooth chime sounded, and the screen lit up. My fingers moved quickly. Dialing Johnson's number time was slipping away. But then, in the corner of my vision, something flashed. A notification, a simple message banner sliding across the top of the screen. "Dylan, 7:32 p.m., you'll never find out. Documents almost ready." My breath caught, my chest tightened. The name hit me like a brick to the skull. Dylan, my son-in-law, my daughter Ruby's husband, the man I had welcomed into my family, trusted like a son. For a second, my brain refused to process it. Surely it was a coincidence. Surely the message wasn't meant the way it looked. But the words, "He'll never find out. Documents almost ready." Something inside me twisted. The phone felt suddenly heavy, like I was holding a loaded gun instead of a piece of plastic and glass. My instincts screamed at me. Ignore it. Respect her privacy. Make the call. This isn't your business. But another voice rose louder. Your entire life is at stake. Don't look away. Not now. With trembling fingers, I tapped the message. The screen shifted, and a thread of conversation unfurled before my eyes, like a wound opening. 3 days' worth of messages. Martha's name, Dylan's replies, their words, their plans. "Martha, Monday, 3:15 p.m. Are you sure about this? What if Maurice suspects something?" "Dylan, Monday, 3:18 p.m. Trust me, I've handled dozens of these cases. He won't see it coming." My stomach churned. My throat tightened. My mind screamed for me to stop reading, to close the thread, but my eyes devoured every line like a man watching his own execution. "Martha, Monday, 8:22 p.m. The timing has to be perfect after the Madison deal closes." "Dylan, Tuesday, 11:45 a.m. 60/40ths, split, just like we discussed. You get the house, retirement accounts. I get my fee plus the business assets through Ruby." Ruby, my daughter, our daughter. They were dragging her into this web of lies without her even knowing. My head spun, bile rising in my throat. Martha, Tuesday, 2:13 p.m. Ruby doesn't know anything. Dylan, Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. Nothing. She thinks I'm working late on a corporate merger. Each line cut deeper. Each word was another betrayal. The love of my life, the mother of my child, the woman I had built everything with, conspiring with my son-in-law to gut me alive, to strip me of everything I owned, to destroy the very legacy we had spent nearly 4 decades building together. And for what? Money? Freedom? Some twisted fantasy of starting fresh without me. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. I scrolled further. Martha, today, 4:30 p.m. I feel terrible lying to her. Dylan, today, 4:33 p.m. It's better this way. Clean break. No messy emotions. Martha, today, 7:28 p.m. When do I file? Dylan, today, 7:31 p.m. In a month, I'll have everything ready. The words swam before my eyes. I felt dizzy, nauseous. 37 years of marriage. 37 years of shared dreams, of laughter, of tears. All of it a lie. Footsteps echoed from the kitchen. Martha returning. Panic surged through me. I closed the message thread, fumbling, my fingers clumsy and numb. The screen flashed back to the home page. Just as she stepped around the corner, her eyes landing on me. How's it going? Did you reach him? I stared at her, at the face I had loved for nearly 4 decades, the green eyes that had once felt like home, the smile that had soothed me after my father's funeral, celebrated with me after every business victory, kissed our daughter goodnight for 18 years. How many times had I looked at that face and seen love, trust, truth, and now, all I could see was a mask. Not yet, I managed. Somehow, my voice came out steady, normal, just dialing now. As if on cue, Johnson's voice crackled through the speaker. Maurice, been waiting for your call. Madison Avenue Air. We moving forward. I swallowed hard. My wife bustled back into the kitchen, humming softly, the picture of domestic comfort. And all I could think was, how long has she been living this lie? How long have I been blind? I forced my voice into business mode, discussing terms, dates, transfers. Every word felt like I was speaking underwater. But beneath the surface, a storm was raging. When the call ended, I handed her phone back. She smiled, kissed my cheek again. You look pale. Everything all right? I lied, just tired. Lot of work lately. And as we sat down to dinner, the roast beef steaming on the plate, the crystal glasses glowing under the chandelier, I looked around at the life I thought was mine. Everything was perfect, beautiful, and utterly false. That night, the roast beef sat heavy in my stomach. I chewed because chewing was expected, because a man sits down to dinner with his wife and eats, but every bite turned to ash in my mouth. Martha carried on as if nothing was wrong, asking about the Madison Avenue deal, smiling as she poured me a glass of red wine. I nodded, smiled back, answered in half-truths. My words came out steady, but inside, I was drowning, because every sentence, every gesture, every familiar smile was now poisoned. When she asked, how was your day? I thought of her, 4:30 p.m. Message, I feel terrible lying to her. And when she mentioned that she had called her sister, I heard Dylan's smug words. Nothing. She thinks I'm working late. Each line from those texts echoed in my skull like a drumbeat. He'll never find out. 60-40 is split. Ruby doesn't know anything. They weren't just words anymore. They were cracks in the foundation of my life, and with each passing minute, those cracks spread wider. I watched her cut into her roast beef, the clink of the knife against the china ringing louder than it should have. I watched the way she lifted her wine glass, the way her green eyes sparkled under the chandelier. How many times had I looked at that same sparkle and believed it was love? Now I saw calculation, secrets, betrayal. Quiet day, she said with a casual shrug. Did some shopping, called my sister, went through some old photo albums, memories, proof of a life we had built together. And yet, all the while, she was plotting to burn it to the ground. I forced a smile. Sounds nice. But in my chest, my heart felt like a stone, dragging me deeper and deeper into despair. That night, when we climbed into bed, she curled up beside me like always, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. To anyone else, it would have looked like a picture of comfort, of enduring love, but to me, it felt like a trap. Her breathing steadied as she drifted to sleep, but mine stayed ragged. My mind refused to rest. I stared up at the ceiling, every muscle in my body tense, listening to the sound of her soft breaths and wondering how long had she been living this double life. Months, years. I replayed the texts in my head. After the Madison deal closes, that meant she'd been watching my business moves closely, calculating, planning her strike. She wasn't stumbling into this betrayal, she was orchestrating it like a general planning a war. And Dylan, my son-in-law, the man who married my daughter, who stood beside her on their wedding day with tears of joy in his eyes. I had shaken his hand that day, pulled him into a hug, welcomed him as family. I had trusted him. Now he was plotting with my wife to take everything from me, using my own daughter as a shield for his lies. A sickness churned in my gut. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. How many times had they looked me in the eye, smiled, and pretended everything was normal? How many family dinners, holiday gatherings, birthdays had been nothing but theater? And the worst part, the most unbearable part, was the silence. I couldn't scream. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I had no plan, no evidence beyond what I had glimpsed. If I rushed forward, if I made one wrong move, everything could collapse. So I lay there, silent, while she slept peacefully on my shoulder, and I memorized every word of those messages. They burned into my brain, branding me with their cruelty. The following morning, the sun streamed in through the curtains as if nothing had changed. Birds chirped in the distance. The world moved on, oblivious to the fact that my entire universe had shattered. Martha hummed softly as she brewed coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, usually a comfort, but today it turned my stomach. She slid a mug toward me with her usual gentle smile. "Morning, honey." I stared at her, wondering how she could look me in the eyes so easily. Did she not feel guilt? Did she not feel the weight of the knife she had driven into my back? "Morning," I said, my voice flat. She sat across from me, sipping her coffee, flipping through the newspaper. To her, this was an ordinary Tuesday. To me, it was the start of a nightmare I couldn't escape. My phone buzzed with a message from Johnson, confirming a follow-up call. I nearly laughed at the irony. Here I was, fighting to secure a multi-million-dollar deal, while the woman I had trusted most was preparing to rob me blind the moment it closed. I studied her face as she read the paper. I looked for telltale cracks in the mask. A hesitation, a flicker of guilt, a moment of shame. But she played the role flawlessly. If I hadn't seen those messages with my own eyes, I would have believed her, and that terrified me more than anything, because it meant she had been deceiving me for longer than I could imagine. That day, at the office, I couldn't focus. My employees discussed numbers, projections, deadlines, but their voices faded into static. All I could see was Martha and Dylan's conversation thread, the betrayal spelled out in black and white. I tried to bury myself in work, but every document, every property file reminded me of what they were planning to take. The business I had built from nothing, through sleepless nights and backbreaking effort, was about to be handed to my son-in-law like a gift, and Martha was helping him. I closed my office door and pressed my palms to my face, my body trembling with a cocktail of rage and grief. Part of me wanted to storm home that instant, throw the phone in her face, demand answers. But another part, the colder, more calculating part, knew that wasn't enough. If I confronted her without proof, she'd deny it, twist it, maybe even delete everything and make me look paranoid. No, I needed more. I needed certainty. The seed of resolve planted itself in my chest that afternoon. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt something other than pain. I felt determination. I would not let them take everything from me. They thought they were clever. They thought they had the upper hand. But they had underestimated one thing. After 37 years of building a life, a business, and a family, I wasn't about to watch it crumble without a fight. I sipped my cold coffee, straightened my tie, and stared out my office window at the city skyline. If Martha and Dylan wanted to play a game, I would play too. But I'd play to win. The cruelest part of betrayal isn't the moment you discover it. It's the silence that follows. Because once you know, every word, every smile, every shared routine feels like poison. You find yourself replaying every memory, wondering which ones were real and which were just illusions designed to keep you blind. For the next few days, I lived in that silence. Martha carried on as if nothing had changed, at least, not for her. She hummed while folding laundry, scrolled through recipes on her tablet, kissed my cheek goodnight, like she always had. But for me, everything had shifted. Every gesture I had once found comforting now felt like a dagger. When she handed me a fresh cup of coffee in the morning, I wondered if her hands had just been texting Dylan. When she asked, "How was work, honey?" I wondered if she was calculating how much longer she had to pretend before the papers were ready. When she kissed me goodnight, I wondered if she imagined Dylan's face instead of mine. It was like living with a stranger who had stolen my wife's body and worn it as a disguise. One evening, a few days after my discovery, Ruby and Dylan came over for dinner. I nearly canceled. The thought of sitting across from them was unbearable. But canceling would raise questions, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The table was set beautifully. As always, Martha fussed over the roast chicken, her laughter warm and inviting as Ruby set down a bottle of wine. Dylan followed her in, wearing that same charming smile I had once respected. To Ruby, he was the perfect husband, hardworking, ambitious, loving. She beamed at him when he took her coat, brushed a hand against her arm, whispered something in her ear that made her giggle. We sat down, and the conversation flowed as it always did. Ruby talked about her new project at work. Martha chimed in with her usual encouragement. Dylan cracked jokes that made everyone laugh, everyone but me. Because beneath that polished surface, I knew the truth, and it made every word feel like a performance. When Dylan complimented the seasoning on the chicken, I heard 60/40 split, just like we discussed. When Martha asked him about his latest corporate merger, I heard Ruby doesn't know anything. She thinks I'm working late. When Ruby squeezed his hand and told us how proud she was of him, I wanted to scream, he's betraying us both. But I stayed silent, smiling when appropriate, laughing on cue, pretending to be the same man I had always been, because that's what survival demanded. Later that night, when Ruby and Dylan left, Martha stood at the sink washing dishes. I lingered in the doorway, watching her. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders, her hands moving through soapy water with practiced ease. She looked so normal, so familiar, and I hated her for it. "How do you think Ruby's doing?" she asked over her shoulder. "She seems happy," I replied evenly. Martha smiled faintly, rinsing a plate. "I'm glad Dylan's taking such good care of her. He really is dedicated to his work." The words made bile rise in my throat. Dedicated to his work. No, dedicated to destroying me. I forced a nod. "Yeah, he is." She turned then, meeting my eyes with that same expression of warmth, of love. For a split second, I almost believed it again. Almost let myself fall back into the comfort of ignorance. But then I remembered her 7:28 p.m. text. "When do I file?" And the illusion shattered all over again. The days blurred together, each one a balancing act between maintaining the mask and silently gathering information. I started paying closer attention to Martha's habits. The subtle pauses when she spoke. The moments when she slipped away to make a call or check on her sister. I began cataloging them, mentally marking every lie. At night, when she slept, I sometimes crept out of bed and wandered the house in silence. I would stand in the kitchen, staring at her phone on the counter, my hand itching to unlock it again, but I didn't, not yet, because I already had enough to know the truth. What I needed now was proof. Solid, undeniable proof. And proof takes patience. But patience was agony. The more time I spent near Dylan, the more difficult it became to control myself. He still greeted me with that easy handshake, still called me Pop like he always had. He still had the audacity to look me in the eye, as if he hadn't been plotting behind my back. I remember one afternoon vividly. We were at a small family barbecue in the backyard. Ruby was inside helping Martha with lemonade, and Dylan and I were left by the grill. He leaned against the fence, beer in hand, casual as ever. "So, Maurice, how's the Madison Avenue deal shaping up?" I froze. His tone was light, conversational, but the words cut deep. He knew. Of course he knew. Martha had told him everything. "Going well," I said carefully, turning the chicken on the grill. "Should close soon." "Good to hear." He took a sip of his beer, his smile just a little too smug, a little too knowing. In that moment, I imagined slamming the spatula into his face, screaming the truth for the whole neighborhood to hear. But I didn't. I smiled, nodded, and flipped the chicken again. Because the trap wasn't ready yet. At night, the loneliness hit hardest. I lay awake beside Martha, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. She looked peaceful in sleep, but to me, she was a stranger. I remembered anniversaries, vacations, the night Ruby was born. I remembered Martha holding my hand at my father's funeral, whispering that she would always be there for me. And I wondered, had that been true once? Or had she always been capable of this? I turned my head to look at her sleeping face. My wife. My partner, my betrayer. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was truly, utterly alone. But amid the loneliness, something else was taking root. Resolve. Because the more lies I watched her tell, the more smug grins I endured from Dylan, the stronger my determination became. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. They thought I would simply crumble when the time came. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to confront them in anger. I wasn't going to tip my hand too early. No, I was going to watch. I was going to wait. And when the time was right, I was going to strike with proof so devastating that they wouldn't just lose the game, they'd lose everything. And as I lay there in the dark, listening to Martha breathe beside me, I whispered silently to myself. Soon, I used to believe betrayal came like thunder. Sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. But the truth is, betrayal seeps in like water through a crack. Quiet, steady, inescapable. And once it's inside, it rots everything it touches. For weeks, I had lived like a ghost in my own home. Smiling at dinners, nodding through conversations, pretending to sleep beside a woman whose every breath was a lie. My patience had carried me this far. But patience is a fragile thing. And one night, it shattered. It was a Thursday evening. Martha had insisted we have dinner alone. Just the two of us. She cooked her famous pot roast, set the table with candles, even poured me a glass of my favorite Merlot. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought she was rekindling the romance. But I did know better. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, just for a second, just a flicker of her eyes. But it was enough. I'd memorized that look, the slight quickening of her breath, the way she bit her lip before looking away. It wasn't Ruby texting her. It wasn't her sister, it was him. Everything all right? I asked casually, spearing a piece of carrot with my fork. Oh yes? Just a reminder about my doctor's appointment tomorrow. The lie rolled off her tongue so easily, I almost admired it. Almost, but inside, my rage coiled tighter. After dinner, she excused herself to take a bath. I stayed at the table, staring at her phone where it still lay on the counter. I could almost feel it taunting me, daring me to unlock it. I had resisted so many times before. Told myself I didn't need more, that I already knew the truth. But that night, the dam broke. I picked up the phone. My hands didn't shake. Not this time. I typed the passcode I had memorized weeks ago. It unlocked with a soft click. The first thing I saw was a thread of messages with D. Dillon. I opened it, and what I found made my blood run cold. The messages weren't vague this time. They weren't harmless lines that could be twisted into something innocent. No, they were explicit. Cold, calculated Dillon. Ruby doesn't suspect a thing. She still thinks I'm just working late. Martha, good. The papers are almost ready. He'll never see it coming. Dillon, once we sell, it's a clean 6. Just make sure you file before he starts shifting assets. Martha, don't worry. I've lived with him long enough. I know his patterns. Dillon, our life starts when this ends. Our life, those two words burned into me like acid. I scrolled further. There were months worth of messages, plans, strategies even things I didn't want to read. Affectionate phrases, nicknames, promises. And suddenly, it wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about business. They had stolen my wife. My partner of 37 years. And worse, they had done it in secret, smiling at me across dinner tables, hugging me at Christmas, toasting with me on birthdays. All while carving me out of my own life. I don't remember putting the phone down. I don't remember walking into the living room or sitting in the dark. All I remember is the sound of the bathwater draining, footsteps padding down the hall, and Martha appearing in the doorway in her robe, towel wrapped around her hair. She froze when she saw me. You scared me, she said with a laugh, clutching the robe tighter. Why are you sitting in the dark? I didn't answer. I just stared. Her smile faltered. Maurice, what's wrong? For a split second, I wanted to scream it all. I wanted to throw her phone at her feet, watch her face collapse as she realized I knew everything. But instead, I stood up, walked past her, and said only 2 words. Good night, Martha, because it wasn't time. Not yet. That night, I lay awake long after she fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word I had read. 60/40ths, our life. He'll never see it coming. The rage was so heavy it felt like my chest would crack open. But beneath the rage was something sharper, clearer, resolve. I realized then that survival wasn't enough anymore. Pretending wasn't enough. If I didn't act soon, they would win. They would take the house, the business, everything I had built with my bare hands, and they would laugh while doing it. That was the night I decided. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. The next morning, I started preparing. I woke earlier than usual, brewed my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. On the first page, I wrote one word in bold letters. Proof, because anger wouldn't save me. Tears wouldn't save me. Even confrontation wouldn't save me. Only proof would, and proof meant digging deeper, much deeper. I thought about my options. I could hire a private investigator. Expensive, but thorough. Or I could take matters into my own hands. Start watching, listening, tracking. In the end, I realized I would need both. This was bigger than me now. If Martha and Dillon wanted to play corporate games, I would play better. I would build my case, brick by brick, until the tower of evidence collapsed on their heads in court, and they would never see it coming. That day marked a shift in me. I still played the part of the doting husband. I still kissed Martha goodbye in the mornings, still listened to her stories over dinner. But behind the mask, I was different. Every word she spoke, I recorded in my memory. Every slip, every inconsistency, I wrote down in my notepad. I began making quiet calls. 2 lawyers, 2 financial advisors, even to an old friend who had once worked in private security. I asked vague questions at first, circling around what I needed. But slowly, piece by piece, I built a team. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I wasn't just a victim. I was a man preparing for war. And then, one night, the final push came. Ruby had invited us over for dinner. Dillon grilled steaks in the backyard, Martha poured wine, and Ruby chatted happily about a trip she wanted to take. Halfway through the meal, Ruby excused herself to check on dessert. That left the 3 of us, me, Martha, and Dillon, sitting there in the twilight. Martha leaned a little too close to him. Their eyes met for half a second too long, and I swear to God, I saw it. The flicker of something more. That was it. The confirmation I didn't need but had always feared. And as I sat there, sipping my wine, I made a silent vow. They thought they were playing chess, but I was about to flip the whole board. The morning after Ruby's dinner, I sat at my desk staring at a blank legal pad. The silence of the house was thick, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I wasn't the same man I'd been a month ago. Martha still thought she was pulling the strings. Still believed her sweet smiles and hollow gestures were enough to keep me blind. Dylan probably thought I was a doddering old fool, too sentimental to see through him. They were wrong, because I had finally embraced the truth. This wasn't just betrayal, this was war. And war required strategy. On the first line of my legal pad, I wrote a single word: leverage. That was the key. Not anger, not tears, not confrontation. Leverage. Something I could hold over them so tightly that when the time came, they couldn't wriggle free. And to get leverage, I needed two things: evidence and allies. Step 1. Securing the fort. The first order of business was the house. Martha didn't know it, but every bill, every mortgage payment, every line of equity was under my name. Decades of careful financial management, my one true obsession, besides family, had given me quiet power. But power only matters if you use it. That morning, I called my lawyer, Gerald Whitaker, an old friend, sharp as a blade, loyal to the core. "Gerald," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need to revisit my estate plan." Quietly, there was a pause on the line. Trouble at home. You could say that. He didn't pry further, and I respected him for it. Over the next week, with Gerald's help, I began shifting pieces around the board. Assets that were once easily accessible became locked behind trusts. Beneficiaries were altered. Accounts were moved to places Martha didn't even know existed. By the time she would even think of filing those divorce papers, she'd find herself grasping at smoke. Step 2. Watching the enemy evidence. That was trickier. I couldn't walk into a courtroom with just screenshots of text messages. Not if Dylan had the money to spin them as taken out of context. No, I needed something undeniable. That's when I called Tony. Tony was an old friend from my Navy days. We hadn't spoken in years, but one favor, one phone call, and he was in. He now ran a small private investigations firm. He had men who could follow Dylan, track Martha, record what needed to be recorded. "You're sure about this, Maurice?" he asked, his voice low. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. And so, the surveillance began. Dylan thought he was clever, sneaking off for business dinners. Martha thought her spa appointments were fooling me. But Tony's men trailed them, documented every meeting, every touch, every careless laugh. Soon, I had photographs, videos, conversations recorded in crystal clarity. Every lie they told stacked neatly into a file I kept hidden in my study. A file thick enough to crush them both if I chose to. Step 3. Playing the role. The hardest part wasn't the planning. It wasn't the lying, or the pretending. It was the acting. Every day, I had to sit across from Martha and pretend nothing had changed. I had to smile when she kissed my cheek, nod when she prattled about redecorating the guest bedroom. Sometimes, when she looked at me, I swore she suspected. Her eyes would linger on mine, searching for a crack in the facade, but I never gave her one, because the mask had become my greatest weapon. I wasn't just Maurice the husband anymore, I was Maurice the shadow, Maurice the hunter. And every day I played dumb, I pulled her deeper into the illusion that I was harmless. Step 4. Turning Ruby into an unwitting ally. Ruby, my daughter, the one person I couldn't lose in this mess. I couldn't tell her outright. Not yet. Not without proof so solid it could never be denied. But I began to plant seeds. Casual conversations, little remarks. "Funny how Dylan's always working late," I'd muse. Or, "Martha's been spending a lot of time with her friends, hasn't she?" Ruby would laugh it off at first, but I could see the wheels turning. Doubt was a slow-growing weed, but once planted, it spreads. If Martha and Dylan thought they could twist Ruby against me, they'd soon find she wasn't so easy to sway. Step 5. The business angle, and then there was the company. My company, the empire I had built with sweat and sacrifice. I knew Dylan was circling it like a vulture, waiting for Martha's legal knife to carve out his share, so I made my move first. I called an emergency board meeting, brought in every trusted partner, every loyal investor. Without revealing too much, I convinced them to back a restructuring, one that quietly transferred voting power away from Martha's reach. The paperwork was ironclad. Dylan could scheme all he wanted, but by the time his hands reached for the prize, it would already be gone. The calm before the storm. Weeks passed this way. By day, I was the weary husband. By night, I was the architect of their downfall. Tony's men delivered photos of Martha and Dylan slipping into hotel rooms, their bodies too close to be denied. Gerald updated me weekly on the legal fortress we were building around the estate. And every morning, I looked in the mirror and saw less of a broken man, and more of a commander readying his troops. But the strangest part, they still underestimated me. Martha's lies grew bolder. Dylan's arrogance swelled. Ruby still invited us over for family dinners, oblivious to the tension burning beneath the surface. It was almost insulting, how little they thought of me. But soon, very soon, they would learn. And then, one evening, the moment arrived. I had just finished reviewing the latest photos from Tony, Martha and Dylan hand in hand outside a hotel. When Martha walked into the room, she froze when she saw the papers on my desk. "What's that?" she asked lightly, though I caught the edge in her voice. Just some financial statements, I replied smoothly, covering the photos with another sheet. She smiled, but her eyes narrowed. That's when I knew the final act was near. She was getting suspicious. The mask wouldn't hold forever, and when it cracked, everything would come crashing down. That night, as she lay beside me, I stared into the darkness and whispered a promise to myself. Soon the mask will come off. Soon, they'll see the man they thought was blind was watching all along. The setup was complete. The trap was laid. All I had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to spring it. The thing about betrayal is this. Once you see it, you can never unsee it. Every gesture, every laugh, every word drips with double meaning. Martha and Dylan still thought they were playing me like a fiddle. But their perfect little performance had begun to slip, and I was watching every second of it. The first slip had happened one Saturday afternoon. Ruby had invited us all over for a family lunch. The smell of roasted chicken filled her kitchen. The sound of her kids laughing rang through the house. It should have been one of those simple, golden moments you carry with you forever. But instead, it turned into another piece of my puzzle. Dylan arrived late. His hair was damp, shirt unbuttoned one too many notches. Ruby scolded him lightly, but Martha's eyes flicked to him in a way no mother-in-law should ever look at her son-in-law. A brief smile, a spark of recognition. Nobody else caught it, but I did. When Ruby turned her back to grab drinks, Dylan leaned closer to Martha and whispered something. She laughed, too quickly, too warmly. I sipped my wine and filed it away. Paranoia, in the bedroom at home. Things grew stranger. Martha had always been meticulous with her phone, but now she guarded it like a soldier in wartime. Even when she showered, the device followed her. One night, while she slept, I carefully slid it from her hand. My heart pounded like I was a teenager sneaking out past curfew. But the moment I unlocked the screen with her fingerprint, a notification popped up. Miss you already. I didn't need to read the rest. I placed the phone back in her hand and lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was patient, like a fisherman with his line cast, waiting for the catch to tire itself out. Dylan's growing arrogance. If Martha was cautious, Dylan was reckless. He started showing up to my company unannounced. At first, he pretended it was to check in on the family business. But soon he grew bold enough to offer suggestions to my staff. Suggestions that made no sense, designed only to plant himself as an authority figure. I let him. I nodded, smiled, and pretended to take his words seriously. My employees, God bless them, looked at me with silent questions in their eyes. Why is he here? Why are you letting him meddle? But I waved them off. Because the higher Dylan climbed onto his imaginary throne, the further he'd fall when I pulled it out from under him. The night out one Friday, Martha told me she was spending the evening with her book club. Funny, because I'd already seen Tony's report. She and Dylan had a reservation at an upscale restaurant 2 towns over. So, I decided to surprise them. I didn't walk in. That would have been too easy, too loud. Instead, I parked across the street, stayed in the shadows, and watched them through the glowing window. There they sat laughing, holding hands beneath the table, sipping wine like a pair of carefree lovers. It wasn't just infidelity, it was mockery. Mockery of everything I'd given. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms, but I didn't storm in. No, storming in would have ended the game too soon. Instead, I raised my phone and snapped a picture. Clear as daylight. Martha's hand resting on Dylan's thigh. Another nail in their coffin. Ruby's suspicions. The hardest part of this unraveling wasn't keeping up my mask for Martha. It was hiding the storm from Ruby. But even she began to sense something. Dad, she said one afternoon, when I stopped by her house to drop off some papers. Are you and Mom? Okay. Her eyes were searching, cautious. Of course, I lied smoothly. Why do you ask? She hesitated, chewing her lip. I don't know. It's just. Mom seems distracted. And Dylan, wow, he's been acting weird lately. Distant. I placed a hand on hers. Don't worry, sweetheart, everything's fine. But the flicker of doubt was there. And I didn't extinguish it, because when the time came, Ruby would need to see the truth with her own eyes. And I would make sure she did. Martha had grown restless too. I could feel it in the way she moved through the house, like a woman pacing the edges of a cage. One night, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat across from me at the kitchen table. You've been quiet lately, she said, her tone light but probing. Just tired, I replied. She studied me for a long moment. Too long. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, I saw fear in her eyes. Not the fear of being caught, but the fear of not being believed. Because deep down, maybe she already knew the mask I wore wasn't for my sake. It was for hers. The breaking point, the unraveling, reached its peak on a cold Thursday evening. I had just returned from a late board meeting when I heard voices in the living room. I stopped in the hallway, hidden by the shadows, and listened. Dylan. His voice was sharp, frustrated. This is taking too long. You said he'd be out of the picture by now. Martha hissed in reply. Keep your voice down. He's not as oblivious as you think. Then make him oblivious. Dylan snapped. The lawyers are ready. But if he moves the assets before we act, we'll lose everything. My jaw tightened. There it was. Proof, not whispers, not gestures, words. They weren't just cheating, they were conspiring, and they thought time was on their side. But time, my dear Martha and Dylan, was my weapon. The calm before the storm that night, as I lay in bed beside her, Martha reached for my hand. Her fingers brushed mine, soft, familiar, practiced. "Good night, Maurice," she whispered. I turned my head, looked at her, silhouetted in the darkness. "Good night," I answered. But my heart was already elsewhere. I knew the unraveling was complete. Their arrogance had exposed them. Their impatience had betrayed them. And soon, the storm I had been building would break. Patience is the weapon of kings. And for months, I had sharpened mine to a razor's edge. Martha and Dylan thought they were predators circling their prey. What they didn't realize was that I'd built the cage they were pacing in, and every move they made only tightened the bars. It was time to shut the door. Setting the stage, I started by visiting my attorney, Franklin, the sharp, no-nonsense man I trusted with my life. I laid out everything I had gathered. Photographs, voice recordings, financial records. He didn't even blink. "Morris, this is airtight. They won't know what hit them." That was the goal. But I didn't want just legal revenge. I wanted something deeper. Humiliation. Exposure. The kind of downfall that leaves scars that never fade. So I set the date. Ruby's birthday. A family dinner, hosted at our home. Martha would never suspect it, not on such a sentimental occasion. The week leading up to it, I played the doting husband. I complimented Martha's cooking, brought her flowers, even surprised her with the necklace she had been eyeing. Her guilt softened her. I could see it in the way her smile sometimes faltered, the way her eyes darted from mine too quickly. But Dylan was arrogant as ever. He strutted into my office uninvited, slapped me on the back, and joked, "One day, old man, you'll be thanking me for keeping the family business alive." I only smiled. "Oh, I'm sure I will," he laughed, oblivious. Ruby's birthday dinner was a picture of warmth. The table was spread with Martha's roast, candles flickered gently, and Ruby's children giggled as they passed around bread rolls. I watched Ruby closely. She deserved none of this chaos. And I promised myself that before the night was done, she would know the truth. And no, I had always stood on her side. After dessert, I stood and raised my glass. To Ruby, I said, my voice steady, "The brightest part of our lives." Everyone clapped. Ruby blushed, and Martha dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Perfect, because no one saw what was coming next. "Since we're all here," I continued, my tone casual, "I thought it might be a good time to share some family news." Martha froze. Dylan stiffened in his chair. Ruby tilted her head. "Family news, yes." I smiled. "For example, did you know your mother has been spending quite a lot of time with Dylan?" The air shattered. Ruby laughed nervously, waiting for a punchline that never came. "What are you talking about, Dad?" I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and set it on the table. A photo appeared. Martha's hand on Dylan's thigh, at that restaurant weeks ago. Ruby's face drained of color. "Dad," her voice trembled. "What is this?" Martha stammered. "It's not what it looks like." I cut her off with a calm wave of my hand. "No, dear, let me explain properly." With one press, the room filled with Dylan's voice. "This is taking too long. You said he'd be out of the picture by now." Then Martha's, "Keep your voice down. He's not as oblivious as you think." The children sat frozen. Ruby clutched the edge of the table like it might keep her world from collapsing. Dylan's face had gone red. Martha's lips quivered. And me? I stood tall, calm, every word a knife honed from months of betrayal. "Martha," I said, turning to her. 37 years of marriage. And this is what you give me. Secret meetings. Whispered plots. Schemes with our son-in-law to take everything we built together." Her eyes filled with tears. "Maurice, please, it wasn't it didn't mean. Don't insult me," I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. Then I turned to Dylan. "And you thought you could worm your way into my business, my family, my wife. You thought you were clever, but let me tell you something, boy, you're not even a good liar." Ruby buried her face in her hands. Her sobs broke what little composure Martha had left. "Maurice, please," Martha begged, reaching for me. "We can fix this." I stepped back. "No, you broke it, and tonight, everyone sees who you really are." I pulled out a second envelope and dropped it on the table. Inside are the papers I filed this morning. Divorce proceedings, asset protection transfers, and legal action against Dylan for corporate misconduct. Dylan's jaw fell open. "What? You can't do this?" I smirked. "Oh, but I already have. Every dollar you thought you'd steal has been moved. Every asset is locked. And when the lawyers finish, you'll be left with nothing but debt and shame." Ruby lifted her head, her eyes blazing through tears. "Is this true, Mom, Dylan?" Their silence was the loudest confession of all. I hadn't planned for Ruby's reaction. I thought she would cry, beg, maybe even retreat. But instead, she turned on them like a storm. "How could you?" she screamed at Martha. With my husband, with him. Her voice broke into sobs, but her rage burned bright. She threw her napkin across the table and shoved back her chair. You disgust me. Dylan tried to reach for her, but she spat in his face. I want a divorce, she said, her voice like ice. The room went dead silent. Martha crumpled, sobbing, begging Ruby for forgiveness. Dylan muttered curses under his breath, eyes darting between us like a trapped rat. But I simply stood, collected my phone, and looked him both in the eye. You wanted to destroy me, I said quietly. Instead, you destroyed yourselves. Then I turned to Ruby, softened my voice, and added, you and the kids deserve better than this poison. And you'll have it, I promise. And with that, I walked out of the dining room, leaving the wreckage behind me. That night, I didn't sleep in the marital bed. I didn't even sleep in the house. I went to a hotel, somewhere clean and silent, where the air wasn't tainted by lies. My phone buzzed endlessly, messages from Martha, from Dylan, even from Ruby. But I didn't answer, because the execution was complete. The trap had snapped shut, and tomorrow, I would begin building a new life. A life without betrayal. The morning after Ruby's birthday dinner, the world felt strangely quiet. No clinking of Martha's teacup in the kitchen. No smell of her perfume lingering in the hallway. Just silence. A silence that felt like freedom. I sat by the window of the hotel, coffee in hand, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I breathed without a weight on my chest. The storm had broken. Within 2 days, Martha was on my doorstep at the hotel, mascara smeared, clutching the necklace I had given her. Maurice, please, she sobbed. Don't do this. Don't throw away 37 years. I made a mistake. I was weak. I didn't even open the door fully. You didn't make a mistake, Martha. You made a choice. Over and over again. Her tears turned bitter, her face twisting. You'll regret this. You think Ruby won't hate you too. You think she'll stay on your side. I smiled, calm. No, Martha, I don't think. I know, because unlike you, I never betrayed her. And then I closed the door. That was the last real conversation we ever had. Dylan tried to fight. Of course he did. He stormed into the office demanding access to company accounts, shouting about his rights and family partnerships. But by then, Franklin had already filed the legal motions. The locks were changed, the accounts sealed, and Dylan's name scrubbed from every official document. He was left with nothing but his own arrogance, and debt collectors circling like vultures. I heard through Ruby later that he had moved into a dingy apartment on the edge of town, drinking himself to sleep most nights. A fitting end for a man who tried to steal everything from me. Ruby amazed me. In the days after the reveal, she was broken, pale, shaking, her voice hoarse from crying. But slowly, like a phoenix, she rose from the ashes. She filed for divorce within a week. She took the kids and moved into a rental I paid for, away from Dylan's poison. One night she called me, her voice steady for the first time in ages. Dad, she said, thank you for protecting me, for protecting the kids. I don't know what I'd do without you. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. You'll never have to know. Ruby, I'll always be here. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding. For her, for my grandchildren. For me. Word spread fast in our town. You can't hide betrayal in a place where everyone knows everyone. Martha couldn't go to church without whispers following her. Old friends stopped calling. Even her sisters distanced themselves, ashamed of her choices. The woman who once held her head high, admired for her perfect family, was now a pariah. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Her disgrace was punishment enough. But I'll admit, there was a dark satisfaction in knowing she had to live every day with the weight of her own decisions. I sold the house where betrayal had seeped into the walls, where Martha and Dylan's laughter had poisoned the air. Instead, I bought a smaller place on the lake. Simple, peaceful, a place where my grandchildren could visit, fish on the dock, and chase fireflies in the yard. The first night I slept there, alone, I listened to the crickets and the soft lap of water against the shore. It wasn't loneliness I felt, it was possibility. Sometimes I sit by the fire in that lake house, staring into the flames, and I wonder, was I too harsh? But then I remember Ruby's tears at that dinner table. The recordings, Martha's hand on Dylan's thigh. No, I wasn't harsh. I was just, because betrayal docenti deserve forgiveness. When it's plotted in the shadows and carried out in your own home, betrayal deserves consequences, and I delivered them. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Martha walked away with far less than she had hoped, enough to keep her afloat, but not enough to rebuild the life she imagined with Dylan. Dylan, on the other hand, was jobless, reputation in ruins. The community had no place for a man who destroyed his own family. Ruby thrived. She found work she loved. Her children flourished. And slowly, her laughter returned. And me, I found peace. Not the naive peace of believing everyone you love will protect you, but the hard-earned peace of knowing you can protect yourself and those who matter most. If you've listened this far, maybe you're wondering if I'd do it all again. The answer is yes. 1,000 times yes. because sometimes in life, justice doesn't come from the courts. It doesn't come from God, or fate, or luck. It comes from standing up, drawing a line, and saying, no more. And when I said those words to Martha and Dylan, I meant them. I still mean them. Because in the end, they didn't just lose the business. They didn't just lose their reputation. They lost me. And that was the one thing they could never replace. And that's how I turned betrayal into justice. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because every day we share true stories of betrayal, revenge, and redemption that you won't want to miss. And if you've ever faced a betrayal of your own, share your story in the comments. You never know, it might be the next one we tell. Until then, stay strong, stay wise, and never let anyone write your ending for you.